I think definitely it is possible, and that is why we're trying to achieve it. Because before we were only talking about poverty reduction. But now if we think that every girl, boy, woman, and man needs to be out of poverty, then the goal should be to eradicate poverty.
Now, in terms of country governments, do you think there's a will to do this? And what steps would have to be taken for this to be reached?
Well, actually, if we look at it from the global agenda, we have it on the spotlight as the first goal is to eliminate and eradicate poverty. And from the continental level, all our African governments have come together under their African Agenda 2063 to say we want to transform our economies, we want to make sure that we focus on people's welfare, and we want to look at how peace and security can be the basis for doing this. So definitely we have a global agenda, we have a continental agenda, but this has to be implemented at the national level. And most countries have national development strategies, they have midterm development plans, they have budgets that are being implemented. So definitely there are pathways to implementing these global objectives. The only problem we are seeing now is that our economies are not transforming as fast as they need to in order to support these broad objectives. For example, Africa's growth is only an average of 3%, but we know if we need to achieve the goals that we want to eradicate poverty, then we need to have at least 7% growth across the board. And this growth needs to be the kind of growth that creates jobs, that creates skills, that provides services to people, and reduces inequality in order for us to be able to achieve these objectives. So definitely there are instruments in place, but they're not being as effective as they could be.
And also you've spoken, I think, to also my question on the challenges. What are the biggest challenges in poverty being eradicated, especially in countries where, they are facing more challenges of famine, of drought, which makes things even more difficult?
Definitely, yes. The problems that we are seeing now related to food security are definitely a challenge to countries that are already struggling to use the available resources that they have to create better lives for their people. Because you can imagine, while we have to provide health services, we have to provide education services, we also have to ensure that agriculture is more productive. And this is one of the key challenges facing a lot of countries in Africa. It's that we have a sector which employs the most people in the country, but it's the least productive. So if we could transform that sector to be more productive, then we'll be able to not only create the jobs, we'll also be able to provide the food, and we'll also be able to improve the incomes of the people so that they can be able to access available food. So definitely one of the key challenges is that one of the sectors that could be the driver for poverty eradication is also one of the sectors that needs the most help right now.
Now, in terms of country governments, because we know how now it's a global economy that everything is just linked. In terms of country governments, what are the steps, especially on the continent? What can we do? We know we have the Chinese coming to the continent and trying to assist, but what are the easiest steps? Is it an ABC step, or which steps could be taken?
I think at this moment in time, we have to look at the instruments that we're using, our planning instruments, our monitoring instruments, and the fact that the government has to work very closely with the private sector. So the most important thing is to look at how we can create an enabling environment for the private sector to thrive, because this is where the jobs are going to be coming from. So while the government is putting the policies in place and trying to mobilize investment, they need to work very closely with the private sector. And then they also need to look at the great opportunities we have on the continent. We have a great number of youth full of ideas, full of talent, and full of skills. How can we best use this resource to be able to drive our economic development? So definitely governments and the private sector need to think about how they can better use these available skills and opportunities. Also, you talked about our natural resources. We are a very rich continent with poor people. And right now, there's a lot that is being done on how we can harness the natural resources we have. And we're not talking only about oil and gas. We're talking about our soil. We're talking about our waterways, talking about, our fishing and so forth. So there definitely is more of a push to see how we can generate revenue from our resources and plug that back into developing initiatives that benefit the entire population.
In terms of the time frames, is it possible to eradicate poverty in 2030? Can we stick to any time frames at this rate?
I think you're talking about a continent with 54 countries. So definitely each country is at a different level, because even if we look at trying to achieve middle income status, there are some countries, if they were able to maintain a growth rate of above 7%, they would be able to achieve middle income status in a much shorter time frame. So it depends really on your starting point. So while general time frame is not possible across the board, I definitely know that each country, based on where they are at present and how far they are from the goal, they are able to set up their own pathways to achieve poverty eradication.